Hi YouTube, it's Kathy, and this is my weekly entertainment wrap-up for July 20th through 26th. This week I read 3 books, I watched 1 show, I watched 1 movie, and I listened to 3 books. Sweet coffee, I love you. Speaking of a love for coffee, the first book I read this week is Café con Lychee. This is a book about 2 different teenagers who go to the same high school, they're on the same soccer team, they both happen to be queer, although one of them is in the closet, and their families have warring restaurants. Theo has parents who are from China and Japan, and they own a tea shop that does like bao buns and that type of thing, but they are very rigid in their menu. They will never ever change it. They've never changed it the whole time they've been there, which he thinks is a big mistake because if they changed it up a little bit, more people might come into the shop. They in fact actually live above the shop, and the building itself is owned by his uncle, who is kind of a jerk. On the other hand, we have Gabby. His parents are Puerto Rican. This is the character who is in the closet because his family says some really homophobic things kind of all the time, and he's like, well, if I come out, I possibly won't be able to live here anymore, so I should just not do that, and I'm going to try my best to be the perfect student. I'm going to try to play soccer even though I hate soccer, just so my parents will love me. He finds out about a month before homecoming that apparently his parents have just decided to sell the shop. They were actually going to sign the papers in the next couple of days, and he went, what do you mean you're just gonna do that? Like, nobody talked to me. I thought this place was going to be my legacy. Now it's just out from under me. And he convinces them to postpone the sale until homecoming. Between these 2 boys, they come up with ideas of how to get more people into their shop, especially because there is a 3rd kind of ethnic place in town that is a fusion place that's basically just doing really Instagrammable things, but all of their food isn't all that good. And they figure they can solve both their problems by secretly delivering food to the students at their school and running kind of an underground operation. As you might guess, this is dual perspective, so we get to see how both of them are taking this situation and what's going on in their lives, and this was just really sweet to see these 2 people that in theory one of them really hated the other while the other was like, I think this guy is really cool, but I'm kind of socially inept, so we'll never be friends, but maybe we'll become friends. There was just a lot of back and forth between their lives, and I really enjoyed it. If you're like me and you watch a lot of YouTube videos in your spare time, this next one is going to sound like I'm segueing into an ad for internet security. I'm not doing that. However, if somebody who has a partnership with this company actually wants to read this book and make that segue, please tag me in your description box as being the person that came up with that idea. The book in question is called Aura. This is by Carlos Fuentes, and it was published in 1962. It's from Mexico, and I only read it because of a challenge on Pagebound. As an aside, Pagebound, if you've never heard of it, is a bookish platform that is pretty brand new. I've only been on there for 2 months, and basically it's kind of like you took all the aspects of Goodreads, you smushed them together with Reddit. It's kind of wholesome. You get these badges and points for doing these different things like commenting on people's posts and that type of thing. It's adorable. I'm really enjoying using it. To the point where next month I'm actually hosting a reread of Red, White, and Royal Blue on that platform because I mentioned in that forum that maybe it's time for a reread, and somebody was like, oh, that would be amazing, and I'm like, should I host a reread? And they're like, yeah! So all throughout August we're gonna read Red, White, and Royal Blue together on that platform. So if you want to join in, you totally can. Pagebound is 100% free. There's an app launching soon. It's a lot of fun things. There's more information about how to exactly find the read along on my Instagram, so go over there, check that out. In any case, Aura is about this historian who one day is just in the cafe, he's reading a paper, and there's an advert in the paper for a young historian. He's like, that's me. And basically everything that's written in this advert seems like it was written specifically for him, and the job pays really, really well. So after a day of thinking about it, he decides to go to this house and figure out if he can get this really well-paying job. When he gets there, things are creepy, and I would have turned around immediately, but he like walks through this dark courtyard and then into this house that has no lights, and eventually meets this old woman, and she's like, my husband died a really long time ago, but his papers are in that trunk, and I need you to write his memoirs. And he's like, yeah, sure, it pays really well, why not? And she has this other woman with her, and she's much younger, and she says she's her niece, and after basically no time and actually never having actually talked to this woman, our main character decides that they're in love. And then also basically out of nowhere they decide that they're married, and they start doing married people things. and it's continuously creepy from there. This is what I would classify as a novelette because it's like 62 pages long, so not quite a novella, but not quite a short story. And I had an extra interesting reading experience for this. Firstly, like I said, it was part of a quest on Pagebound, so I wanted to read something for that quest. This seemed short, my library seemed to have it, so I asked for my library to give me the copy. And when I got the copy, it was actually from the World Languages section, so even though the synopsis on the library website was in English, it was in fact in Spanish. So I found a translation online, but it only had 4 out of 5 of the chapters translated, which was a bummer because I was basically like 4 pages away from the end of this and I just wanted to know how it ended. So I ended up just using Google Translate on my phone, which I know is probably not the best, but it got me there. It got me to figure out what was going on in this book. And I feel like talking about why I picked this up, how I picked this up, and the process of reading it was maybe a little bit more interesting than the actual book. But I can also put this on my banned books list because some politician in Mexico saw that his teenage daughter was reading it in school and was like, what is all this sexual content in this short story? Oh my goodness. And it got banned. So there's that. The third book I read with my eyeballs is All Our Ordinary Stories. This is a graphic novel and it's multi-generational. It's about this woman who's growing up in Calgary. It's her memoir. And she's talking about how she's had trouble connecting with her parents because they came from China. They were actually freedom swimmers in China, which is a phenomenon I didn't know about previously because I didn't know a lot about the history because it's just not my subject of choice. But in any case, they primarily speak, I believe it's Mandarin, and she primarily speaks English, although she knows some Mandarin. So she's grown up as the eldest daughter of this couple and has always basically had to translate things for them while they're living in Canada, which is where she was born. This goes through some of her familial stories, how her parents actually met, people even further back than that, and just trying to piece together a family history, and it was so interesting. I highly recommend this one. As for the show I watched, of course it was Silent Witness. The last time I talked to you I was in the 18th season, and this week I got to the 20th season. I also realized that this whole time I thought there were only 23 seasons out so far, and that is wrong. There are 27, so I have 4 more seasons before I'm gonna have to take a break from this show, which is amazing. I'm one of those people that watches the opening credits because I like reading the names of people, and like the opening credits for this aren't that long. And now that they did something like 15 seasons ago that made it so the opening song doesn't actually give me a headache anymore, it's very easy to watch through. So I definitely noticed as soon as they had a 4th person's name in the opening credits, which I cheered about because 1, I love it when people get that type of recognition, and 2, I really like the character whose actor's name is now in the opening credits. If you're wondering, the actor is Liz Carr, the character is Clarissa, and I really like her. As per normal, we had some wild rides in these episodes, especially in the 2-parter where it looked like Nikki was going to go down for murder. 20 seasons in, I'm not really tiring of this, and I'm really excited to see what happens next. As for the movie I watched this week, we've left Jurassic Park behind and we watched Jurassic World. This is wild because I knew going into this, yes, there's like 3 movies in this new franchise. All I really knew about it though was that Chris Pratt was in the movies. Like, I knew nothing about the premise of the movies, and it is wild to me that after all the things that happened in the first 3 movies in the park era, if you will, 10 years later they've actually opened up a park. And I'm just like, but why? But why? So if you're following, we're 10 years later, John Hammond has definitely passed away a long time ago, and he's given the reins to somebody else who wants to do really well, wants people to have a really good time in this park, all of those types of things. But they also decided people think that dinosaurs aren't quite cool enough, so they need to make this weird hybrid dinosaur that's like bigger and scarier and pointier teeth and that type of stuff, and you know, that's not going to go wrong at all. Spoiler! It went really wrong. I also have this really weird moment near the beginning of the movie where we're shown the parents and their 2 kids, and I'm like, oh my goodness, it's the guy that plays Simon in Love, Simon. And both of my roommates are like, what's that? And I'm like, oh yeah, you're not dialed into queer culture like I am. That's fair. Also, his character is modeling some very suspicious behavior because from the very beginning we know he has a girlfriend, and then the first few things he does when he gets to the park is just ogling girls. And I'm like, why? On to the books I listened to this week, the first one being the In-Between Bookstore. This one has such a cool premise. We have this character, he's 29, he's about to turn 30 in about a month's time, and he's just been let go from his startup job. He was writing grants for them, he's no longer working there, he's living in New York, which is very, very expensive, and the rent is about to be raised on his apartment, so he's just like, this is not a good time to lose my job. And while he's talking about this at the bar with his best friends because it's one of their birthdays, he kind of thinks to himself, well, maybe I'll go home. Maybe I'll just go back to the town that I came from. You also know from the beginning that he's trans, the rest of his friends are queer. He actually met the first of those friends at like the first meetup at his college, and she was the first person he ever said the words "I'm trans" to, which is just a heartwarming moment you get to revisit in this book, which I really loved. But since transitioning, he hasn't really spent any time in his small hometown. However, the next day he finds out that his mom is actually selling his family home to move into a condo, and he's like, well, I'll go back and I'll help her move, and that'll give me some time to figure out what I'm doing with my life. And while he's kind of packing things up in his house, he finds this box from this place called the In-Between Bookstore, which is the bookstore in his small town where he used to work as a teenager before he went off to college. This makes him think, like, is that place still around? It'd be really cool to go back there. And on his first night back, he actually goes to the bookstore, and behind the counter is somebody that looks oddly familiar because it's him at age 17. One of the reasons he hasn't really gone back to this small town all too much is because he used to have this best friend up until about the age of 17 where they did everything together, they were inseparable, and then for whatever reason his best friend just kind of cut him out of his life. Because Darby spent his first semester of his senior year at a boarding school, so when he came back for the second semester, his best friend just had seemingly replaced him and they didn't talk again, and that was really awkward, and he still doesn't know why. So now when he finds himself time traveling back to when he was about to turn 17, he figures that he can talk to his younger self to try to figure out what happened and why he and Michael are no longer friends. This was such a beautiful premise and such a wonderful exploration of things that happened and how they changed the course of your life and whether or not you can go back and fix them, and this was just so good. I really enjoyed getting to know all of these characters, what was going on, the different misconceptions that this character had in particular of their hometown, and it was just so good. Everyone go read it. Second audiobook I finished this week is Me and White Supremacy. This is a book that I actually reread every single year. And before this was a book, it was a 28-day Instagram challenge where you would learn about what is white supremacy and what are these different facets of it and what are things you might need to think about when you're thinking about white supremacy, especially when it comes to anti-blackness. After that, it was formulated into a book where you can go through it at whichever pace you like. There are journaling prompts. There's definitely work to be done if you're white or white passing. And I made a promise to reread it every year just so I have these things kind of at the top of my brain. I think this is about the 7th time I've read it, so obviously I recommend it. Finally this week, mostly during a very long walk yesterday, I listened to The Sea of Monsters. This is the second in the Percy Jackson and the Olympian series. What struck me at the beginning of this is how formulaic the very beginning of this book is, because it starts with Percy, it's his last day of school, he goes to school, something big happens, and then he has to be on the run and go back to Camp Half-Blood. But the formulaic nature doesn't stop there. Grover isn't there right now because he's off on a quest, but he basically only has this one friend at this new school, somebody that all the other kids pick on. That sounds very familiar. In fact, they pick on him to the point where they call him the R slur, and he's like, he's not the R slur, which is something that directly happened when it comes to Grover in the first book. And then we find out that that one person who's been his friend this whole year is magical, which is exactly what happened in the first book. So all of that I was like, are we just doing the same thing over again? Because we already did that. But in any case, once you get over all of that and that type of language, which we definitely don't use anymore, but I know was prevalent at the time, trust me, I lived at the time, we move into what's happening at the camp, how can we fix that, the different things we can go on, and we of course meet a bunch of different characters from mythology, which is always fun. This is a series I decided I'm actually going to complete, although I'm not doing it anytime quickly, because I started this series as audiobooks, and I like to continue series in the format that I started them if I can, which is actually why I never read the third in the Broken Earth trilogy, because my library didn't have the audiobook, so I just never got around to it, and now I would definitely have to reread those books before getting to the third one because I've forgotten most of the things that happened. With the exception of the big reveal of the 3 different characters from the first book. That was cool. In any case, that's all to say it's going to be about 21 weeks before I get to the next book in this series because that's the approximate hold time for the next audiobook. That's it for this week. If you've read, watched, or listened to any of these, let me know about it down in the comments below. On the way down to the comments, if you hit that subscribe button, that would be very nice of you. If you don't feel like leaving a comment but want to make sure that I know you were here, just leave me an emoji or a smiley face if you happen to be on your keyboard. Some people have asked if there's a way to financially support this channel, so I set up a Ko-fi account, which is a digital tipping service. The link for that, as always, is down below. You can like and share this as you see fit, and I will see you very soon. Bye!